Today, we're diving into 2,000-year-old Stoic rules that have stood the test of time. These practical, mindset-shifting principles can help you find clarity, resilience, and inner peace in a chaotic world. Stay tuned, because by the end, you'll have timeless tools to take on anything life throws your way. Number 1. Don't let external events disturb your inner peace. Stoicism is all about keeping a calm mind in the face of chaos, right? One of the core principles is that you shouldn't let external events mess with your inner peace. That sounds nice and simple, but in reality, it's probably one of the hardest things to practice, especially when life throws its inevitable curveballs. The Stoics, though, believed that it was entirely possible, even essential, to stay grounded no matter what happens around you. Imagine your mind like a still pond. When you're calm and collected, the surface is smooth. But the moment you let external events get to you, whether it's bad news, someone's opinion, or just a rough day at work, those waters get all stirred up, don't they? Ripples, waves, maybe even a storm if it's a really bad day. But here's the thing, Stoicism teaches that the external stuff is just the wind. It blows. It's there. It's not something you can control. The only thing you have control over is your reaction to it. Your mind, your thoughts, that's your pond. You're in charge of keeping it calm. Now, it's easier said than done. We live in a world where we're constantly reacting. It's human nature to feel something, whether it's anger, sadness, or frustration, when life throws a wrench in your plans. But that's where the Stoics come in with this idea: what's happening out there isn't what disturbs you. It's how you interpret it that causes the disturbance. In other words, you create your own inner turbulence by how you think about what's happening. Epictetus, one of the big names in Stoicism, had this brilliant line: "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." That's the crux of it. You can't control most of what happens in life, but you can absolutely control how you think about it. And by changing the way you think, you can maintain that inner peace, even when things are spiraling outside of your control. This isn't about becoming a robot or shutting down your emotions, though. Stoicism doesn't ask you to stop feeling, but rather, to understand that emotions are natural and fleeting. You can acknowledge them without letting them consume you. It's about not allowing every little thing to dictate your mood or your sense of well-being. That's what inner peace is, a steady state of mind that isn't rocked by every passing event. The Stoics also remind us that most things aren't as bad as we think. Often, the stress or anxiety we feel about something is way worse than the thing itself. We tend to catastrophize, blowing things up in our heads to be much bigger than they are. But if you can step back, take a breath, and recognize that most external events are neutral until you label them otherwise, you've already won half the battle. So, when something unexpected happens, try pausing. Don't react immediately. Give yourself a moment to decide how you want to respond. By doing that, you're reclaiming control over your inner world, regardless of what's happening outside. That's the Stoic way to protect your peace. Number 2, do good without expecting recognition. Do good without expecting recognition. Sounds simple enough, right? But when you start thinking about it, it's not as easy as it seems. Most of us, whether we realize it or not, crave validation. We like that pat on the back, the acknowledgement, the feeling that someone sees what we're doing and appreciates it. It feels good. But here's the thing, Stoicism teaches us to let go of that desire. It asks us to do good for the sake of doing good, not because it boosts our ego or earns us applause. Imagine this, you help someone out, and no one notices. No thank you, no great job, no warm glow of appreciation. What happens next? Are you still satisfied with your action? Or do you feel a twinge of disappointment? Stoicism encourages us to dig deep into why we feel that way and recognize that needing validation can be a slippery slope. If you start doing things just to be recognized, you're no longer acting from a place of true virtue. You're essentially trading kindness for credit, and that's not really what the Stoics had in mind. They believed that virtue is its own reward. That's a powerful idea. It means the act of doing good, in itself, is enough. It's not about what others think of you. It's about aligning your actions with your values, acting with integrity, and knowing you did the right thing, even if no one else sees it. When you act with this mindset, you're freed from the burden of other people's opinions. You stop being a performer on someone else's stage, always waiting for that round of applause. Instead, you become grounded in your own sense of purpose and morality. Now, this doesn't mean that recognition is inherently bad. It's natural to feel good when someone acknowledges your efforts, and there's nothing wrong with enjoying that. But the point here is that you shouldn't depend on it. The Stoic approach is about resilience, not just physical or emotional resilience, but resilience in your intentions. Your motivation should come from within, not from the fleeting approval of others. It's a shift in perspective. Instead of thinking, "I hope someone notices," you begin to think, "I know this is right, and that's all that matters." This internal shift can change how you approach your day-to-day life. Suddenly, you're less worried about being seen as successful or kind or generous. You just are those things, regardless of whether anyone is watching. It's almost like letting go of a weight you didn't even know you were carrying. At its core, Stoicism invites us to find peace in our own actions. To let the world be what it is, and to focus on what we can control, our own thoughts, choices, and behavior. Recognition? That's outside our control. It's fickle, fleeting, and often tied to factors that have nothing to do with our true selves. So why chase it? When you truly embrace this Stoic mindset, you begin to find a deeper, more lasting sense of satisfaction in your actions. You're no longer riding the highs and lows of external praise. You're steady, grounded, and most importantly, at peace with yourself. Number 3, practice silence as a form of wisdom. Silence. We don't often think about it in a world constantly buzzing with noise, do we? Yet, the ancient Stoics, those sharp-minded philosophers, saw silence as something much more than the absence of sound. To them, silence wasn't just a pause between conversations. It was an intentional, powerful act. They believed that silence could shape our thinking, guide our actions, and ultimately lead us to wisdom. Sounds intriguing, right? Let's break it down. Practicing silence isn't about retreating from the world or becoming some sort of mute monk. It's about recognizing that not every thought needs to be spoken and not every conversation deserves a response. This is where things get tricky, though, because we humans are wired to talk. We feel the urge to fill empty spaces with words, whether they're meaningful or not. But here's the kicker: the more we talk, the less we listen, not just to others, but to ourselves. Silence gives us that space to step back and reflect, to sort through the clutter of our thoughts. When we stay quiet, we can observe the world more clearly, without the filter of our own opinions getting in the way. Think about it. How often have you spoken too soon and regretted it? We've all been there. That moment where you wish you had taken just one more second to think before saying something. The Stoics were masters at this. They knew that silence is often the wiser choice because it gives you time to consider the impact of your words. Is what you're about to say necessary? Is it helpful? Is it true? These are the questions silence allows you to ponder before jumping into the fray. But it's not just about preventing mistakes. Silence can also be a form of strength. In a heated discussion, the person who remains calm and quiet holds a certain power, don't you think? While others get swept away by emotions, the silent observer stands firm, unaffected. This is where silence transforms into a kind of wisdom, the ability to stay still when everything around you is moving. It's like watching a storm pass by without getting caught in the rain. What's fascinating is that silence also fosters deeper connections. You might think talking is how we connect with people, but sometimes, being silent is where true understanding begins. When you're not busy planning your next reply, you actually start to hear what's being said. You catch the subtle meanings, the things people aren't saying aloud. It's in that space of silence that empathy and insight can grow. Now, silence isn't easy. It can be uncomfortable, even awkward at times. We've all felt that tension when a conversation drops into an awkward lull. But here's the thing, that discomfort, that's where the magic happens. It's in those moments of quiet that we come face to face with our thoughts, our judgments, our truths. Silence forces us to sit with ourselves, and that's where we can begin to see the world, and ourselves, more clearly. In the end, practicing silence is about choosing wisdom over impulse. It's about being intentional with our words and mindful of when to speak and when to stay quiet. It's about realizing that sometimes, the loudest thing you can say is nothing at all. Number 4, stay indifferent to praise and criticism. Let's be honest, staying indifferent to praise and criticism is no easy feat. We're wired to care about what others think of us, right? When someone showers us with compliments, it feels good. Our chest puffs up a bit, we get a rush, and suddenly the world looks a little brighter. On the flip side, when criticism comes our way, even if it's constructive, it stings. It lingers. It can make us question ourselves, our choices, or even our worth. But the Stoics? They saw it all differently. For them, neither praise nor criticism should affect us too much. Both are just opinions, after all. They don't define us unless we let them. Praise, as sweet as it may feel, can trap you if you start relying on it. And criticism? It can crush you if you let it carry too much weight. That's why the Stoics suggest this radical idea: be indifferent to both. Imagine walking through life with an unshakable sense of self. You don't need validation from others, and you're not derailed by their judgments either. It's not that you ignore what people say or live in isolation, but you don't let their words dictate your self-worth. Praise feels nice, sure, but it doesn't inflate your ego. Criticism might sting for a second, but it doesn't tear you down. You stay steady, like a tree with deep roots, unaffected by the winds of opinion blowing around you. See, here's the thing, praise and criticism are external. And according to the Stoics, anything external is outside your control. You can't control what people think of you or how they perceive you. They're operating from their own set of beliefs, experiences, and biases. You could do the exact same thing, say the exact same words, and one person might love you for it while another might hate you. Does that mean you've changed? Nope. It's just their interpretation. Now, if you start chasing praise or running from criticism, you're handing over your power to something outside of you. You're saying, how I feel about myself depends on what others think of me. That's a slippery slope. The moment you let other people's opinions sway how you see yourself, you're no longer in control of your inner peace. You become like a leaf in the wind, tossed around by every compliment or critique that comes your way. And let's be real, people's opinions can be fickle. One day you're up, the next day you're down. Who wants to live like that? The Stoics suggest we look at praise and criticism with the same neutral lens. Instead of getting high on praise or crushed by criticism, you acknowledge them for what they are, just feedback. You can listen to it, maybe even learn from it, but you don't let it get under your skin. You stay rooted in your own judgment of yourself, based on your values, your actions, and your understanding of what's right. In the end, the only opinion that truly matters is your own. Not in a selfish, self-centered way, but in the sense that you are the one who knows yourself best. You're the one who lives with your choices. So why let someone else's fleeting opinion sway you? Stay indifferent, and you'll find a lot more freedom in how you move through the world. Number 5. Avoid unnecessary conflict. Avoid unnecessary conflict. It's a piece of wisdom that's been passed down for centuries, and the Stoics really knew what they were talking about here. It's easy to get swept up in arguments and disagreements. Sometimes, it almost feels like we're drawn to conflict, like it's a magnet we can't resist. We see something that bothers us, and boom, we're off, ready to argue, ready to prove we're right, or maybe just ready to defend ourselves. But the Stoics had a different approach. They believed that many of these conflicts are just noise, distractions from what really matters in life. The thing is, conflict drains energy. It consumes time and mental space that could be used for more meaningful things. And often, the issues we get worked up over don't even matter in the grand scheme of things. They're fleeting, trivial, or based on misunderstandings. The Stoic way is about recognizing when a battle just isn't worth fighting. It's about being able to step back, take a breath, and ask yourself, is this really something I need to get involved in? Is this going to make my life, or anyone else's, better? There's power in choosing your battles wisely. When you avoid unnecessary conflict, you conserve your energy for the things that truly deserve your attention. You don't have to be drawn into every argument or disagreement that comes your way. In fact, the Stoics would argue that being constantly pulled into conflicts is a sign of weakness, not strength. True strength lies in restraint, in the ability to walk away from something that doesn't serve you or the greater good. But avoiding conflict doesn't mean being passive or letting people walk all over you. It's not about backing down when you should stand up for yourself or others. The key word here is unnecessary. There will always be situations where conflict is inevitable or even essential, but the Stoics are asking us to get better at discerning when that's the case. Not every slight, every disagreement, or every criticism needs to escalate into a full-blown argument. Sometimes, the best response is no response at all. In those moments when you feel the pull to jump into a heated exchange, take a moment. Ask yourself, what's the endgame here? Am I going to change the other person's mind? Is this going to lead to a productive outcome? Or am I just getting swept up in emotion, in the need to be right? 9 times out of 10, you'll find that the conflict isn't really worth it. It's just your ego trying to assert itself, or perhaps an emotional reaction to something that triggered you in the moment. The Stoics encourage us to focus on what we can control, our thoughts, our actions, our responses. Other people's behavior? That's outside our control. We can't change how others think or act, but we can change how we react to them. And often, the most powerful reaction is no reaction at all. It's the decision to rise above the pettiness, the drama, and the noise. When you start to avoid unnecessary conflict, something interesting happens. You become calmer. You start to see that not everything needs to be a battle. You begin to realize that peace of mind is far more valuable than winning an argument or proving a point. It's a kind of freedom from being entangled in every little disagreement, freedom from letting other people's actions dictate your own peace. At the end of the day, the Stoic approach to conflict is about clarity. It's about knowing when to step in and when to step back. By avoiding the conflicts that don't matter, you create more space for the things that do. Number 6. Reframe obstacles as opportunities. Obstacles. They're like those uninvited guests that show up at the worst possible time. But here's the thing, what if those obstacles aren't as terrible as we make them out to be? What if, and stay with me here, they're actually the very things we need? That's where the Stoic mindset comes into play. The ancient Stoics had this way of flipping the script on challenges. Instead of seeing roadblocks as problems, they viewed them as opportunities in disguise. Sounds wild, right? But let's dive into that for a second. When something doesn't go our way, the knee-jerk reaction is to get frustrated, maybe even angry. We look at that obstacle and think, Why me, or why now? But the Stoics would pause and ask, okay, what can I learn from this? It's a subtle but powerful shift. Rather than getting stuck in the negativity of the situation, they would reframe it. To them, every challenge was a test, a chance to grow, to strengthen their character, to practice their virtues. It's like turning a problem inside out and suddenly seeing the hidden potential within it. That's the magic of reframing. Think of obstacles as weights in a gym. Yeah, they're heavy, they're uncomfortable, and at times, you'd rather just avoid them altogether. But those weights? They're what make you stronger. And it's the same with life's obstacles. They push you to your limits, force you to adapt, to think differently, to find solutions you wouldn't have considered if everything had been easy. The Stoics believe that the difficulties we face aren't in the way, they are the way. It's the struggles, the detours, the setbacks that lead us to growth. But let's be real for a moment, reframing obstacles is no walk in the park. It takes effort, a conscious decision to look at things from a new angle. The Stoics weren't pretending that challenges weren't tough. They knew they were. What set them apart was their determination to not let those challenges define them. Instead of saying, "This is terrible," they'd say, "This is an opportunity to become better, to learn something I didn't know before." That shift in perspective gave them power over the situation, rather than feeling powerless in it. And here's the beauty of it all: once you start reframing obstacles, you begin to see how much potential is hidden in the messiness of life. Suddenly, that thing you were dreading becomes a stepping stone to something bigger. It doesn't mean it magically becomes easy, far from it. But what it does mean is that you're no longer trapped by your circumstances. You're shaping them, bending them to work in your favor. That's where the Stoic mindset shines. It puts the control back in your hands, no matter how chaotic things seem on the outside. So, the next time you hit a roadblock, try to see it differently. Instead of focusing on what's going wrong, ask yourself, how can I use this? How can this make me stronger, smarter, more resilient? It's a small shift, but it can change everything. Obstacles aren't there to stop you. They're there to show you what you're really capable of. Number 7, avoid overindulgence in pleasure. When the Stoics talk about avoiding overindulgence in pleasure, they're not saying you should live like a monk, cutting out all the joys and comforts life has to offer. They weren't against pleasure itself, but they had a warning: get too wrapped up in chasing it, and you're going to lose your balance. Pleasure is a tricky thing. It can be fun and satisfying in the moment, sure, but there's a fine line between enjoying something and letting it take control of you. The Stoics believe that once you start overindulging in those feel-good moments, it can turn into a kind of trap. What starts as a bit of fun or comfort can quickly turn into a constant craving. And when you're always chasing pleasure, you're not really free. You're at the mercy of your desires, letting them pull you around wherever they want. Think about it like this: you indulge, it feels great, but then what? That fleeting high eventually fades, and then you're left wanting more. It becomes a cycle, doesn't it? One pleasure leads to the need for another, and suddenly you're caught up in an endless loop of trying to satisfy something that never stays satisfied for long. The Stoics saw this as a path to dependency, not happiness. Instead of enjoying things in moderation, you can end up in a state where you're always wanting more but never feeling truly content. They also saw how indulging too much in pleasure could mess with your judgment. When you're constantly seeking pleasure, you start to prioritize it above other things, things that might actually be more important. Your goals, your values, even your sense of right and wrong can get blurred when you're too focused on pleasure. It's like letting a shiny distraction pull you away from what really matters. You might start making decisions based on short-term gratification rather than long-term well-being. And the Stoics were all about playing the long game when it came to happiness. But here's the kicker: the Stoics weren't advocating for a life without enjoyment. They weren't saying you have to give up everything you love. They just thought it was crucial to stay in control of your desires rather than letting your desires control you. It's about moderation, about knowing when to indulge and when to step back. They saw pleasure as something that's fine in small doses, but dangerous if you let it take the reins. At the end of the day, the Stoics wanted us to focus on what we can control. Pleasure? It's one of those external things. You can't control how much you want it, but you can control how you respond to that want. Do you give in every time, or do you choose to step back and not let it dictate your choices? It's about being mindful of the pull that pleasure can have and making sure it doesn't steer you off course. By avoiding overindulgence, you keep yourself centered. You maintain the clarity of mind that the Stoics prized so much. And in doing so, you can still enjoy the pleasures of life, just without letting them rule you. That's the sweet spot the Stoics aimed for, a life where you're in charge, not your cravings. Number 8. See hardship as a teacher. See hardship as a teacher. Now, this is one of those Stoic ideas that hits you in the gut when you first hear it. It sounds kind of counterintuitive, right? Who actually wants hardship? It's uncomfortable, messy, and honestly, downright painful at times. But the Stoics, in their infinite wisdom, saw things differently. They believed that life's challenges, those moments when everything feels like it's falling apart, are actually opportunities in disguise. Opportunities to grow, to learn, and to become stronger. Think about it. When things are easy, we coast. We're on autopilot, just cruising along. But it's when life throws obstacles in our path that we really start to stretch, to dig deeper, to figure out what we're truly made of. The Stoics embraced this idea wholeheartedly. They didn't shy away from difficulty, they welcomed it. Why? Because they knew that hardship has the potential to shape us in ways that comfort never could. Now, that's not to say we should go around looking for problems or hoping for challenges. No one's saying you need to actively seek out adversity. Life has a way of bringing those things to us whether we want them or not. But what the Stoics are asking us to do is change the way we see those moments when they arrive. Instead of thinking, "Why is this happening to me?" or "This is so unfair," they want us to flip the script. The question becomes, what can I learn from this? How can this make me better? It's a total mindset shift. Instead of feeling victimized by hardship, you start to see it as part of the process, part of the journey. It's like life's way of testing you, of saying, "Let's see what you've got." And in those moments, you get to decide how you respond. Do you crumble? Or do you rise to the occasion, even if it feels like the last thing you want to do? The Stoics believe that by leaning into the struggle, by facing it head-on, we develop resilience. And resilience? That's like a superpower. But here's the thing, the value of hardship isn't just about becoming stronger. It's also about gaining wisdom. When you've been through tough times, you start to see the world differently. You understand more, not just about yourself, but about other people, too. Hardship humbles you, it broadens your perspective, and it teaches you empathy. You begin to realize that everyone is fighting their own battles, and that life isn't about avoiding challenges, but about learning how to navigate them with grace. This isn't to sugarcoat the reality of hardship. It's tough, plain and simple. But the Stoic point of view reminds us that pain and difficulty are not the enemy. In fact, they can be some of our greatest allies, if we let them. The lessons that hardship teaches us, though often uncomfortable, are some of the most valuable lessons we'll ever learn. It's through those tough times that we figure out who we really are and what we're capable of. So, the next time life throws something heavy your way, remember, this is your teacher. It's not here to break you, it's here to show you something, to help you grow. You might not see it right away, and that's okay. The lessons of hardship often reveal themselves slowly, over time. But rest assured, they're there, waiting to make you stronger, wiser, and more resilient. Number 9. Learn to let go of resentment. Let's talk about resentment. It's that gnawing feeling we all know too well, isn't it? The tightness in your chest, the bitterness that lingers, that little voice whispering, "Why did they do that to me?" It's a heavy weight, but the Stoics, those wise old philosophers, would tell you to drop it. And not just because it feels terrible, which, let's be honest, it does, but because holding on to resentment is like drinking poison and expecting someone else to suffer. You're only hurting yourself. Here's the thing, resentment doesn't fix anything. It doesn't change what happened or make things better. It's just you, reliving the same frustration over and over again, like a broken record stuck on the same sour note. The Stoics believe that to live a good life, you've got to let go of that. Easier said than done, right? But they had some wisdom on how to get there. First, they'd remind you that resentment is a choice. Yeah, that might sting a bit. It's hard to hear that we're the ones holding on to it when we want to blame someone else for how we feel. But that's exactly the point. The Stoics taught that we can't control what other people do. We can't control whether they hurt us, wrong us, or act unfairly. What we can control, though, is how we respond. And resentment? That's just a response we can choose to drop. Now, the Stoics weren't about pretending things don't hurt. They weren't telling you to ignore the pain or act like nothing bothers you. Instead, they'd say, feel it, process it, but don't let it consume you. There's a certain power in recognizing that someone else's actions don't have to own your emotions. You can decide to move forward. You can decide not to let that bitterness take root. But letting go of resentment isn't just about lightening your emotional load, it's about freeing yourself up for bigger, better things. When you're stuck in resentment, your mind is trapped in the past, constantly replaying old hurts. There's no room for new growth, new experiences, or even new connections. It's like trying to move forward while dragging a huge bag of rocks behind you. The Stoics believe that to live fully, you have to cut that bag loose. Drop the rocks. They're not doing you any favors. And here's where it gets interesting. The Stoics believe that when you let go of resentment, you create space for something else, compassion. Yeah, compassion. Not necessarily for the person who wronged you, but for yourself. You're no longer stuck in the role of the victim, endlessly carrying the weight of what happened. You're choosing to rise above it. And that choice? That's freedom. That's the real power. So, how do you actually let go of resentment? It's not a switch you flip overnight. It's more of a practice, a process. Start by accepting that what's done is done. No amount of holding onto the hurt is going to change it. Then, shift your focus to what you can control, your thoughts, your emotions, your reactions. Slowly, you begin to realize that you're in charge, not the person or event that caused the pain. And in that realization, the resentment starts to lose its grip. In the end, learning to let go of resentment is about reclaiming your peace. It's about saying, I won't let this control me any longer. And that, my friend, is where real strength lies. Number 10. Understand the fleeting nature of fame. The Stoics had a sharp view on fame. They saw right through the illusion of it, realizing that fame is like a puff of smoke, momentary, insubstantial, and bound to disappear. And here's the thing, fame is enticing, no doubt about it. It's a shiny object that a lot of people chase after, thinking it'll bring them happiness or make them feel more important. But the Stoics believe that fame is as fleeting as the wind, a temporary blip in the grand scheme of things. Why get attached to something that's going to fade as quickly as it arrived? Fame is tricky because it can make you feel like you're standing on top of the world, but how long does that really last? For the Stoics, it wasn't about avoiding recognition altogether, but about understanding that fame, much like everything external, is outside your control. And if you base your sense of worth on something so unpredictable, you're setting yourself up for a roller coaster ride. One minute you're basking in admiration, the next you're forgotten. That's how fame works. It's fickle, inconsistent, and ultimately hollow if that's where you hang your identity. What the Stoics really wanted us to grasp is how irrelevant fame is in the bigger picture. Sure, people might know your name for a while, but what does that actually mean? Does it change who you are? Does it give your life more meaning? The Stoics would say no. It's all surface-level stuff, just noise from the outside world. At its core, fame doesn't touch the essence of who you are. It's a distraction, a fleeting acknowledgement that, when stripped away, leaves nothing but the truth of your character. And here's where things get really interesting. The Stoics remind us that fame is not only temporary but also incredibly limited in scope. The people who praise you today will eventually forget you. Even the greatest names in history, no matter how far they've traveled through time, are still nothing more than a faint echo. How many people truly remember them? And even those who do, how many understand their real essence? The Stoics saw this game of fame as one of endless striving for something that offers no real fulfillment. It's chasing after shadows. So, if fame is fleeting and shallow, what should we focus on instead? The Stoics would say your character, your virtue, your internal compass. Those are the things that truly matter, the things that fame can never touch. Fame might shine a light on you for a brief moment, but it's what you do in the dark, when no one's watching, that defines you. Fame can be snatched away at any moment, but your integrity? That's something no one can take from you. In a way, understanding the fleeting nature of fame is freeing. Once you realize that the opinions and attention of others aren't where your value lies, you can let go of the pressure to impress or be remembered. You stop worrying about the spotlight and start focusing on what really counts, the choices you make, the actions you take, and the peace you find within yourself. Fame comes and goes, but the Stoics knew that a life well lived isn't measured by how many people know your name. It's measured by how true you are to yourself. Number 11, view death as a natural process. Death. It's the big, looming question mark that none of us really want to think about, right? But the Stoics, they weren't afraid to tackle it head-on. In fact, they thought about death a lot. Not in a dark, brooding way, though. For them, death wasn't some terrifying unknown lurking in the shadows. It was just another part of life's cycle, as natural as breathing. They believed that embracing death, rather than running from it, could change the way we live. And honestly, they might be onto something. Let's unpack that for a minute. The Stoics saw death as something inevitable. Not good or bad, just a fact of existence. It's as certain as the sun rising and setting. And here's where it gets interesting. By accepting death as a natural process, they found freedom. When you make peace with the idea that life has an expiration date, you stop fearing it so much. Death is no longer this monstrous thing lurking at the edge of your awareness. It's just a part of the journey. Nothing more, nothing less. But this isn't about being morbid. The Stoics didn't dwell on death to be all gloomy. Quite the opposite, actually. By contemplating death, they were able to appreciate life more fully. When you understand that your time is limited, it makes every moment feel sharper, more vibrant. It's like knowing the season is going to change. Suddenly, you savor the warmth of the sun a little more, feel the breeze on your skin a little deeper. You're present because you know it won't last forever. And that's the thing. The Stoics believed that death wasn't something to fear or avoid thinking about, but something that could guide us. If you realize you won't be here forever, the little stuff that stresses you out starts to seem a lot smaller. The Stoics would say, why waste time worrying about trivial things when your time on this planet is ticking away? It's like getting a wake-up call from the universe, live fully now, because tomorrow isn't promised. But don't get it twisted, accepting death doesn't mean giving up on life. It's not about becoming indifferent or detached. In fact, it's the opposite. The Stoics wanted us to live with intention, with purpose. Understanding that death is natural allows you to stop trying to avoid it and instead focus on what's in front of you, on living well. And there's a strange kind of comfort in that. Knowing that death is part of the deal means you can stop trying to outrun it and start living for today. The Stoics also believed that everything in nature follows a cycle, and death is simply part of that cycle. Just like the trees shed their leaves or the tides rise and fall, we too are part of something larger. We're born, we live, we die. It's the way of things. No one escapes it, and there's a certain peace in accepting that. Fighting against it, fearing it, well, that's just wasted energy. So, what does this all mean? It means viewing death as a natural process helps you put things into perspective. It's not about being fearless or indifferent, but about understanding that life is precious because it's temporary. The Stoics would tell us to remember that death isn't the end of everything, it's just part of the story. And the more we embrace that, the more fully we can live. Number 12, prioritize mental freedom over material wealth. Prioritize mental freedom over material wealth. It's one of those Stoic lessons that feels particularly relevant, even thousands of years later. We live in a world that's obsessed with stuff, more money, bigger houses, flashier things. It's easy to get caught up in that whirlwind, to start thinking that happiness, security, or success is tied to how much you have. But the Stoics had a different idea. They believed that real freedom, the kind that actually brings peace and contentment, doesn't come from accumulating things. It comes from freeing your mind. When you think about it, material wealth can be kind of a trap. The more you have, the more you worry about losing it. You start becoming attached, almost imprisoned by your possessions, constantly thinking about how to protect them, how to get more, how to hold on to what you already have. It's like walking around with a heavy backpack that you don't even realize you're carrying. The Stoics would tell us that this attachment to material things pulls us away from true freedom, because we become dependent on them. Our happiness starts to hinge on something external, something that can disappear at any moment. But mental freedom? That's something no one can take from you. It's internal. It's about having control over your thoughts, your reactions, your state of mind. The Stoics believed that if you could cultivate mental freedom, then it wouldn't matter how much money you had or didn't have. You could lose everything, and still be at peace. Why? Because your sense of contentment wouldn't come from what's outside of you. It would come from within. It's about mastering your inner world, instead of constantly chasing after things in the outer world. This isn't to say that material wealth is bad, or that you shouldn't enjoy nice things. The Stoics weren't anti-wealth. They just didn't think it should be your main focus. They saw wealth as something neutral, useful, sure, but not essential for living a good life. What's essential, they'd argue, is your state of mind. If you're constantly chasing after the next shiny thing, constantly worried about what you don't have, then you're never really free. You're always at the mercy of your desires, always feeling like something is missing. Mental freedom, on the other hand, is about letting go of that endless chase. It's about realizing that your worth, your happiness, and your peace of mind aren't tied to anything outside of you. When you start to prioritize mental freedom, you begin to see that you already have everything you need. You don't need to fill your life with stuff to feel fulfilled. Instead, you can focus on cultivating wisdom, practicing gratitude, and staying grounded in the present moment. The Stoics would remind us that material things are fleeting. They can be taken away in an instant. But your mind? That's yours. And if you can learn to master it, if you can let go of the attachment to wealth and possessions, you'll find a kind of freedom that's far more valuable than anything money can buy. It's the freedom to be content, no matter what your external circumstances look like. It's the ability to find peace, even in the midst of chaos. So, prioritize your mental freedom. Let go of the need to constantly acquire, to constantly measure yourself by what you have. Instead, focus on what's going on inside your head. That's where true wealth lies. That's where freedom begins. Number 13, recognize your limited control. Let's face it, the idea of control is kind of an illusion, isn't it? We like to think we've got everything neatly managed, that we can somehow steer life in exactly the direction we want. But deep down, we know that's not really the case. Things go sideways all the time. And the Stoics? They were all over this concept. They believed that one of the most important lessons in life is recognizing how little control we actually have over most things. Sounds a bit harsh at first, but stick with me, it's more freeing than you might think. Here's the deal, the Stoics broke life down into two categories. First, there are the things you can control, your thoughts, your actions, your decisions. And then, there's everything else. Everything else is pretty much out of your hands. You can't control other people. You can't control the weather, the economy, or the random events that life throws at you. It's humbling, really. But this idea isn't about making you feel powerless. Quite the opposite. Once you grasp the concept of limited control, life suddenly becomes a lot simpler. You stop wasting energy on the things you can't change. You stop trying to bend the world to your will. You start focusing on what's actually within your power, your choices, your mindset, your responses. In that shift, that's where peace comes in. It's like letting go of a rope you've been pulling too hard on. Suddenly, there's a sense of relief. But here's where it gets interesting. The Stoics didn't think this mindset was about passivity or just sitting back and letting life happen to you. Not at all. Recognizing your limited control is more like focusing your efforts where they'll actually make a difference. Instead of fighting battles you can't win, you get to direct your energy toward what truly matters. It's about being proactive in the areas you can influence and letting go of the frustration that comes from trying to control the uncontrollable. And let's be honest, trying to control everything is exhausting. You plan, you strategize, you worry, and yet things still go off script. It's maddening. But the Stoics were onto something when they said, let go. It's not about giving up. It's about accepting that the universe is going to do its thing, whether you like it or not. And that's okay. What's not okay is letting all that external stuff dictate your happiness or your peace of mind. That's the part you can control. Imagine how different life feels when you stop fixating on what's beyond your reach. You no longer get swept up in the chaos of things you can't change. Instead, you anchor yourself in the present moment, in the choices you can make. There's a sense of clarity in that, like cutting through all the noise. You might not control the storm, but you can control how you steer your ship. So, what's the takeaway here? It's about finding freedom and letting go of what you never really had control over in the first place. Once you accept that you can't control everything, you stop feeling like you're failing when life doesn't go according to plan. You shift your focus inward, to your own actions, and that's where real power lies. You don't need to control the world around you, you just need to master yourself. That's where the Stoics lived, and that's where true peace begins. Number 14, cultivate self-discipline in small things. Self-discipline. It sounds big, doesn't it? Like some Herculean task that requires a lot of effort, grit, and willpower. But here's the thing, the Stoics believe that real self-discipline doesn't start with grand gestures. It starts in the small things. Those little moments when no one's watching. That's where the magic happens. Tiny habits, small decisions, everyday choices, that's where you start building the kind of inner strength that carries you through life. Now, the Stoics weren't saying you need to become some ultra-strict person who never lets loose or enjoys anything. That's not the point. What they meant by cultivating self-discipline in small things is about training yourself, little by little, to become the master of your impulses rather than being ruled by them. It's those seemingly insignificant choices that add up. The ones where you decide to hold back, or maybe push a bit further, even when it's uncomfortable. It's in the small things that you learn to control yourself, and that's where real freedom lies. You see, the Stoics knew that if you can't handle the small stuff, the bigger challenges in life will seem impossible. It's like a muscle, right? You don't walk into a gym for the first time and start lifting the heaviest weight you see. You start small, you work up to it. The same applies here. You practice self-discipline in the little moments, and over time, you'll find that it becomes a natural part of who you are. You're not forcing it anymore, it's just how you operate. There's also something deeply empowering about this approach. When you focus on cultivating self-discipline in the small things, you realize how much control you actually have over your life. You don't have to wait for some big event or crisis to prove your resilience. Every day is full of opportunities to build that inner muscle, to make choices that align with your values, even when it's easier to just go with the flow. And the beauty of this is that it's not about perfection. The Stoics weren't aiming for flawless discipline. They knew that mistakes happen, that sometimes you'll slip, and that's okay. What matters is the direction you're moving in. Each time you practice a little self-restraint, each time you make a conscious decision instead of letting impulse take over, you're building something solid inside yourself. Self-discipline in the small things also teaches you patience. It's not about immediate gratification. The Stoics valued long-term growth over quick wins. When you discipline yourself in those little moments, you're training your mind to focus on the bigger picture. It's about the long game. It's about slowly, but steadily, shaping yourself into the person you want to be, one small step at a time. By cultivating self-discipline in the small things, you're preparing yourself for life's bigger challenges. And when those challenges come, you'll be ready. Because you've been practicing all along, building that strength, little by little. The Stoics knew that real discipline isn't something that shows up in big, flashy ways. It's born quietly, in the small, everyday moments, where the real work of life happens. And in those moments, you find your true power. Number 15, regard time as your most precious resource. Regard time as your most precious resource. It sounds simple, but the more you think about it, the deeper it goes. The Stoics really understood the value of time. They knew it's the one thing we can never get back, no matter how hard we try. Money? You can lose it and earn it again. Possessions? They come and go. But time? Once it's spent, it's gone for good. And yet, so often, we treat it like it's endless, like there's always more of it just waiting around the corner. Imagine if you thought about time the same way you think about your money. You wouldn't just throw it away on useless things or give it away to anyone who asked, right? You'd be careful with it, deliberately. You'd budget it, knowing that every bit counts. But so many of us treat our time like it's an unlimited resource. We waste it on things that don't matter, distractions that leave us feeling empty. And then we wonder why we feel like we're always running out of time, always in a rush, always behind. The Stoics were all about this idea of using time wisely. They didn't believe in filling their days with mindless activity or chasing after things that didn't add value. For them, time was too precious to be wasted on trivial pursuits. It wasn't about cramming in as much as possible, but about being intentional with how they spent their time. They believed in living with purpose, in making sure that each moment served a higher goal. It's about quality, not quantity. But here's the catch: we often don't realize how much time we're wasting until it's too late. It slips through our fingers, minute by minute, hour by hour, while we're caught up in distractions, dramas, or tasks that don't really matter. The Stoics would tell us to stop and take a look at how we're spending our days. Are we focusing on what really matters? Or are we letting the days pass by without giving them much thought? When you start to see time as your most valuable resource, everything changes. You begin to cut out the noise, to let go of the things that drain your time and energy without giving anything back. You become more mindful of how you spend your hours, who you spend them with, and what you're doing with them. Instead of rushing through the day, you start to savor it. You stop taking it for granted and begin to understand that every moment is a gift, one you can't afford to waste. But this doesn't mean you have to be hyper-productive all the time. The Stoics weren't about hustle culture or working yourself to the bone. They believed in balance. Sometimes, using your time wisely means resting, reflecting, or just being present. It's not about doing more, it's about doing what's meaningful. It's about making sure that when you look back on how you've spent your time, you don't feel regret for the things you didn't do, but a sense of peace that you used your moments well. Ultimately, the Stoics would urge us to remember that time is fleeting. It's always moving, always slipping away, whether we're aware of it or not. And once it's gone, it's gone. You can't buy more of it, no matter how wealthy or powerful you are. That's why they placed such a high value on using it with intention. Because in the end, time is life. And how you spend your time is how you spend your life. So, regard your time with care. Protect it. Use it wisely. Be present in the moments that matter. Because when everything else fades, the way you've spent your time is what remains. As we wrap up, remember that these ancient Stoic principles aren't just relics of the past, they're timeless tools to navigate the challenges of life today. Whether it's staying calm in the face of adversity, focusing on what you can control, or practicing gratitude, these simple but profound ideas can transform how you live each day. So, take a moment to reflect on what resonated with you, and consider how you can start applying these Stoic lessons in your own life. After all, wisdom isn't just about knowing, it's about doing. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more content like this. And share your thoughts or favorite Stoic quotes in the comments below. We'd love to hear how these ancient ideas inspire you. Thanks for watching, and until next time, live wisely.